Alright. Let's stop for a second discussing whether Aureen is actually a good name for a dragon. And let's talk about something else for a little while. So, you guys remember when Living World Season 3 began again? That with that release, we had a huge Ask Me Anything from the developers over on Reddit? Well, I kind of thought that would be a special thing, specifically because there'd been a bit of turbulence recently, and hey, it was the beginning of Living World Season 3, and there'd been a huge content drought, and people felt starved for that information, so the devs did us all a solid, and they gave us an AMA. Well, actually, another one happened for episode 2. So that's pretty awesome. I'm wondering whether that's going to be something they're planning for each release. That would be pretty incredible. And in fact, a lot of the stuff you see that they're talking about in this AMA here, it's like they had in the can ready to go answers about some stuff that happened recently, like Gale Grey getting hacked in Guild Wars 1, or the insider trading incidents, which really the devs have been very tight-lipped on, until this AMA came out. So, just as I did with the previous one, I'm going to go through every single one of the developer comments, pick out the ones that actually mean something, and give you guys all the latest scoop on what is that exactly is going on, and how I actually think that that stuff's going to end up impacting the game. So sit back. This is basically in the order of newest comments to oldest, except I'm going to jumpstart one, which is absolutely massive, and something I think that is huge. Now, they opened up the AMA by saying this as well, by the way, that it took them just under 2 months to deliver the second episode of The Living World, which does beat expectations. Remember, a lot of us were thinking it was going to be one every 3 months or so. It didn't even take them 2 months, if you really want to get technical about it, which is pretty cool, but they're saying even though that happened, just keep thinking 2 to 3 months for releases. We could have to wait a full 3 months for the next episode, who knows, but that's pretty impressive, right? Like, look back honestly to Season 2 of The Living World. I know it was marketed and it felt like we were getting bi-weekly updates back then, but that really didn't last very long at all, and really it was more like a couple of updates, then a break, and then a couple of updates, and then a break, and the updates themselves were tiny. Now we're getting something major, okay? Each patch, they have confirmed in this AMA, not only is it on a reasonably rapid cycle here, with current event patches going in the middle, but they've confirmed that they are trying, at the very least, okay? Check out the on screen the quote for the exact wording. They are trying to get a new map for every Living World patch. Holy balls. Okay, so refrain a second, I guess. Try not to get too excited about that and consider that they might do an update where there isn't a new map. I certainly do see a lot of space for them to be giving us an update without a new map. I mean, they could do an update where we get to see some stuff at Fort Trinity, we get to see the fate of the Pale Tree, we get a ton of human politics stuff back in Divinity's Reach, we get more stuff in existing Fire Island chain stuff, or maybe Bloodstone Fen or whatever. There's plenty of space to tell story in the core world without adding a new map, but this is huge. If they could actually make that, I was talking about this on a stream quite recently as kind of a crazy pie-in-the-sky stupid idea, and here we have a dev in this AMA genuinely suggesting that they might be able to pull it off. Think about that, guys. Lake Doric, the region of Thunderhead, going north of Brisbane Wildlands, even more areas in the Fire Island chain, all those places, here we come. Oh, that's brilliant. And to think we don't even have to wait that long for it. So that was probably the standout thing from the entire AMA for me. There were a lot of other cool comments, especially from Mo, which we'll get to as we continue along. But I wanted to jumpstart that one for you guys. Let me know, what do you think of that? Is that going to be too much? I think it's really smart, though, because what we're looking at in a couple of years is they want people to buy Living World Season 3 content, and they're gating these maps fully off behind those episodes, so the new players will have big incentive to go back and buy them, unlike with Season 2, where really you only do it for the story, which you the story rewards, I should say, because you can experience the story and the maps just by playing them through a party with your friends anyway. So it's going to be really interesting to see if they make that. Not to mention the fact there's new fractals coming. Not to mention the fact that they do also confirm here there's a new raid still in development. It's brilliant. Okay, so let's just go straight through the list. If you guys remember the previous AMA that I did, some of these won't pique your interest, and I'll just zoom through them. There were a lot of comments, but this is basically my abridged summary of what was going on. First of all, they do actually confirm an update that went in that wasn't on the patch notes. Unfortunately, this happens quite a lot with Guild Wars, but it's understandable with any huge piece of software that you're updating very frequently. It's hard to keep that documentation all at hand, but apparently the Aether Blade puzzle had a lighting improvement that never made it into the patch notes. Awesome. Moving on. They had a little bit of a confirmation as well that Living World seasons after the next expansion pack will actually require that expansion pack. See, what you guys should realize is if you want to go to a place like Ember Bay, there's actually 2 gates as a new player of Guild Wars 2 you need to get through. Number 1 is you need to own Heart of Thorns, and number 2 is you need to own that specific episode of The Living World. Now, for most of us, we get that episode of The Living World for free because we're existing players. You're very likely to be an existing player, for example, if you're watching this video. But for Mr. Potential Joe Blogs, 2 years in the future, there's like these extra hoops that they're going to have to jump through, and I think that's going to become a bigger question of how ArenaNet deals with that, with their business model and stuff, as we go forward. But they're at least confirming this, and I think many of us suspected it. If we get another expansion in 2 years, say Guild Wars 2 Cow, the Cogs of War, and that releases through its living world a bunch of places in the Blood Legion homelands, then you're going to need Cow to get those, just as you need Heart of Thorns to get Ember Bay. Makes sense, I hope, at the very least. So moving on, Andrew M mentions that in the early days, I really liked this comment. Anything where they're talking about the early development of Guild Wars 2, they're talking about the days where they essentially had Queensdale, but in the Guild Wars 1 engine and so forth, or if they're releasing screenshots of early dev stuff. Andrew mentioned that in the very early days of Guild Wars 2, they did try a system we saw in Guild Wars 1, but it's now been removed. And that's the system of having different types of damage. Guild Wars 1 was hugely bloated in this respect. Guild Wars 1 had a lot of different mechanics and a lot of different things that I actually think in many cases Guild Wars 2 cutting back on them, simplifying the situation, was a good move. But this one I've never really thought it was. So GW1 didn't just have damage, it had damage types, okay? So you could do fire damage, and fire damage would do more to, say, plants, but it would do less to, say, rangers. And you had earth damage, and you had ice damage. And then for physical damage, there were various types as well. There was blunt, there was slashing, there was chopping, I think. And then there were all these other weird ones like holy and shadow and chaos, and then just straight up armor ignoring, and so on and so on and so on. You get the point. Well, they could have ported that to Guild Wars 2, but he says actually that they didn't feel like it worked very well. Unfortunately, they're always so vague about stuff like this. What didn't work very well about it? And I actually wonder whether they're kind of kicking themselves for doing that now, because with the way that the game's gone with elite specializations, I foresee a big issue with Guild Wars 2, maybe not the next expansion, but definitely the one after that, where finding specific elite specializations with their own niches and ideas is going to get harder and harder and harder. And I wonder whether they regret removing this component of the combat, because something like that would be a great tool for having different elite specializations differentiate from one another. So for example, you could have 2 elite specializations that are actually incredibly similar, but one does ice damage while the other one does blunt damage, and there you go, they can have their own little niches or whatever. Anyway, it's just kind of an interesting comment. I guess we'll move on. Something pretty big for anybody who plays the game on Mac. This, whenever the Mac client comes up, and it seems to be coming up a lot when there's big developer interactions like this, such as AMAs, it always makes me think of an old friend I had years ago, back when I was at school, the later years of me at school, and I was just getting into Guild Wars 1. I remember being at school and telling an old friend of mine all about factions specifically, and he was pretty interested in the lore, but he only used a Mac. And I remember he was really put off of playing Guild Wars because it wasn't very good with the Mac. And I remember that was my first exposure to Wine as I tried to get it compatible for him. Anyway, for Guild Wars 2, the Mac client has always been kind of an infamous thing in that it's always been in beta and it's always been a bit shoddy, kind of like the Hall of Monuments reward calculator remaining in beta also. Well, apparently they've been doing serious development on it. There's this thing called the native Mac client. So apparently they have characters now in-game running around, things are working very well. Supposedly it's OpenGL. Somebody else even asked them also, hey, when this comes out or when we're using this, is there perhaps going to be a performance boost for Windows users to use this instead? And they said unlikely. I guess that leaves a very slim chance that you might have some kind of a performance boost, but that's pretty cool. And apparently it's just sort of been this project that's been bubbling away in the background, and there might even be some kind of a release very soon. If not, there's already been one. I haven't been following it too closely. But yeah, the Mac client development, these are the kind of little parts of Guild Wars 2 that it's great to see are actually being picked up. It feels like in so many respects Guild Wars 2 now is able to look at old ideas and things and actually dedicate time to them. I wonder what the hell changed. You know, it's like the fact that Basket Brawl, this old data mine, Tyria 3D, whatever thing, that was this potential seemed wasted and gone away, and boom, it just got added back to the game a little while ago. Only for a temporary period of time, but you get what I mean. In any case, the Mac OpenGL client, I guess we'll keep an eye out for it. Moving on, next little quote, we're talking about the underwater fractal, and really this isn't anything major, but they do say that they have plans to revisit it in the future. Now, the person asking the question, their specific issue was with the dolphin fractal, something about getting stunned while they were in the middle of dodge rolls. I don't really see that as the biggest problem with the underwater fractal, but I am looking forward to whatever they have in store. I think it was quite obvious they'd have something in store, though, for what it's worth, because they have already told us that revamps to fractals are on their radar. There'll be another little comment on that very soon. This doesn't really say whether the underwater one is on top of the list for all others for a revamp, but it will come at some point, I see. Another thing about fractals, they're even considering adding gliding to the fractal hub. And you might think, well, WP, that's really weird. Why is that there? Don't forget that this patch did upgrade the fractal hub in quite a significant way, and having gliding there I guess would be a little bit more handy for people. It'll be interesting if they can get that tech to work, because as far as I understand, Fractals of the Mist, the hub is the same map as all the other fractals, and so if you enable gliding in the hub, doesn't that enable gliding everywhere in all the fractals? The technology to do that's kind of interesting. It's kind of like they just disable gliding everywhere else, kind of like they do with the jumping puzzles, even though the instance itself is flagged to have it on. I don't know. Anyway, they never got that technical about it. Moving on. I was a little bit disappointed on the lore side of things here. I never talked about it on my channel because they released the damn thing about 2 seconds after I put up a news video for that day. But on the Monday or so, just before the patch came out, ArenaNet released this cool little poster from the circus on Ember Bay, and they're talking about the 12th wonder of Tyria, which is their giant sloth. Now, this is obviously just a fun little poster. I think they released it through Facebook or whatever. I'm not even sure if it appears in-game anywhere. But what is interesting is that they suggest that there are these 11 wonders of Tyria, similar to how we have the wonders of the world ourselves. And that did spark a bit of discussion online as to, I wonder what these could be. I was kind of hoping somewhere in the back of my mind that the devs really had figured out what those could be, and not only were they some locations we'd seen before, like, I don't know, the Great Northern Wall, for example, but they could have conceived of a bunch of things maybe on their internal wiki that we haven't even seen yet, you know, beyond the boundaries of where we are, maybe something in the land of Dawn that we saw on the wider world map at some point, or somewhere far away in the land of Misandry, if we'd translated that correctly. That would have been awesome if they'd really sat down and thought of all of that stuff. Well, somebody asked them, and it sounds really from the response like it was just a bit of fun. They didn't really think of 11 wonders of Tyria. Come on, get on it, ArenaNet. You need to have every single stone ready with a real lore answer, otherwise we will be disappointed. Okay, moving on. There was a little bit of a comment about World vs. World. Of course, World vs. World has been getting its updates. One of the more recent things they got was skirmishes. I haven't talked too much about on my channel, but somebody was asking, hey, are you happy with whether the skirmishes went? Is this just a stepping stone to greater things? What's going on? Well, they're saying basically they're still assessing the idea of skirmishes, but what I found most interesting about this response actually was that the next balance change for skills and so forth, which you'll note didn't come with this update because it was in the middle of a PvP season. They're actually saying that when the next balance change comes, a lot of the changes are specifically geared for World versus World. I'd love to hear what their perspective is for what World versus World balance needs right now. And don't misinterpret that, guys. That doesn't mean there's going to be skills splitting deliberately for World versus World. I don't think they're really doing that. They definitely are for just PvP now, but I don't know about World versus World. Just that there's going to be some changes that are designed to address things in World versus World. There you go. There was a really boring question about the cats. Will we be able to pet the cats in the home instance? Naturally, everybody freaks out and decides they want to do it. Moving on. Someone actually asked how they came up with the name Aurene. I've stirred quite a pot by talking about how I don't like the name. I love all these people that have come out of the woodworks in support of dislike over Aurene's name and how Aurene looks and so forth. But in any case, guys, it is just a name. It's a pretty small thing to get hung up on. But they were asked, hey, who made the name Aurene? Was it one person? Was it a team? And ArenaNet didn't really answer the question. We didn't get to see who we could blame or love for this wonderful dragon name. But there was an interesting point and clarification, actually, in that when you're making names, it's a little bit harder than might first look because you've got stuff like localization to think of. Often when you come up with a cool name, it can just backfire on you because you didn't consider what it means in another language. I think Arena's actually done quite well internationally, especially people from Brazil. You guys are loving that name. But ArenaNet have struggled with this before, and name me a game developer that doesn't struggle with something like this. My classic example I always think of is back in Guild Wars 1, I used to do the Sunspear Lightbringer Point farm, and on there was a boss called Dupek the Mighty, to which all my Polish friends would laugh their asses off at. Moving on, they did talk a little bit about masteries as well. Here's the quote. Basically, you might have noticed this, that the mastery points you can get from the Ring of Fire are still called Maguma mastery points, and that's because the mastery system was designed around the jungle that you were in for the expansion and so on, and they don't have a new category just for Fire Island chain mastery points because there's not enough new mastery specifically for that map. Listen, guys, okay? ArenaNet here say, oh, we're looking into it or whatever. Just gut the mastery system. The mastery system has so much wrong. Let's face it. It needs a pretty big rework if it's going to be some sustainable thing that they're going to be able to work with as we go forward. I mean, it's going to be so weird as well if we end up going to, you know, some new map that they add in the Shiver Peaks. And oh, hey, guess what? We're in Maguma. Though, interestingly enough, Mount Maelstrom was considered as Maguma, right? For the longest time. So, hey, maybe it's not that far-fetched. Moving on, ArenaNet Ben said that they're actually still looking into overhauls of old fractals, which I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, but he gives a little bit more information that actually it's a really lucrative idea because, number one, they want all the fractals at a good standard of quality. I think now that the changes have gone in on the Swamp Fractal, people are actually a lot more happy with the new Bloomhunger fight and so forth. So they are doing well. When they overhaul these fractals, they are improving them, bringing the standard quality up, and they want that across the board for places like the Underwater Fractal, and they even say it's way less work to do an overhaul, but despite that, their current focus is on new fractals. Yep, fractals, plural. So there were like 2 or 3 responses about this as well. We didn't get any details about the new fractals, just that, you know, the new story that they're doing in the fractals will be told through these new ones. I'm very interested in what those could be. It's nice to hear that there's even more than one in the can as it stands as well. Bit of an economy question here about T6 leather. If you've been playing the game recently, you should know this. It is bloated like all hell. Leather has done a complete switcheroo from where it was once upon a time. I cringe at the day I was in the Grove and I bought a bunch of leather at like merchant price and just vended it all. Oh god, I should have held on to it. But so they're being asked, are you going to actually fix the leather? The prices are ridiculous. I'll read the quote verbatim. It's actually from Mike. Mike had a lot of great messages on this AMA, and he says this, and I very much agree with what he's saying as well. Maybe it's just because I don't need any leather myself at the moment, and I get to be in this impartial position. He says, historically, we've done quite a few tweaks to supply when prices get outside the range that they intend for items. But they're going to hold off on leather for a while. There's actually a ton of supply, he says, of leather and flax. But apparently the trading price, while expensive, is not enough to get people to sell what they're sitting on or to farm them for profit. People have more wealth than they used to, and it's changing their behavior. This is because of the daily system, you guys remember, where everybody's getting 2 gold as active people. He concludes by saying that they want to give the market time to balance itself. And I do think, honestly, being the guy in charge of the economy is a very thankless job, let me say. It's very hard for people to be balanced about these things. I do generally prefer the idea of being a little bit more hands-off. I don't know what he means by it's very easy to farm, because honestly, leather isn't very easy to farm. That's one of the main things about it compared to some of these other materials. But we'll see whether it stabilizes its way down or what. It will probably just take a bit of time. I know not everybody's going to be happy to hear that, but again, I respect how candid Mike can be about some of these responses, right? It's very refreshing to see. All right, moving on. A little bit of talk about the gliding skills from Bloodstained Fen. Now, you guys might have noticed in the new map, they don't appear. And those skills are damn fun. Nuke people from orbit, massive amounts of support for people, huge mobility. You don't even have to be gliding. You can just press and hold space anywhere you like on a tiny little pebble on the ground, and then you'll be able to boost across the floor at insane speeds. They're really fun skills. People ask, hey, why aren't they in Ember Bay? I think it's so obvious why they're not in Ember Bay. It's because they're ridiculously overpowered. And if you give people that kind of mobility, you're making these huge, beautiful maps with all of this space and exploration involved in them, and people are cutting through it instantly, okay? You have the new mastery to work with. You have the unique new method of travel that ArenaNet have developed for this map. I think that's enough, really. I would never be an advocate of these skills being used everywhere and anywhere. There are a couple of discussions reactions after the previous patch came out where people were asking for it all over Tyria. I think that would be a huge monumental mistake. ArenaNet aren't doing it, but their reasons for it aren't anywhere in line with mine, it seems. They just said it's because they felt like those skills would have been tacked on in this map, that they're not thematically appropriate for it. And that's it. Well, whatever their reason, I'm happy we're in the position where those skills aren't being seen everywhere. I know not everybody's going to be happy to hear me say that, but I think that's the more moderate, reasonable approach for the game in general. Something I was really happy to hear, somebody asked who was it that pushed for Moto to reappear in the story for this patch? This was one of the highlights of the patch for me. I really like seeing some Moto influence, that he's a real character, that he's doing real things in Tyria, not just during these Super Adventure Box festivals. We don't just treat him as a vendor, basically. And apparently it was Josh himself who was pushing for it, so good job to Josh. You push for something that was absolutely the right call to make, and these kind of integrations and little things in the story are exactly what we need, so very happy with that. Moving on, there's a bit of a discussion about repeatable hearts. Now, I don't want to get into, on this video, whether they were successful or not. I'm sure we all have our opinions on them. I'll make mine clear soon enough. But the question at hand specifically was, hey, can you go back and make the old hearts repeatable like the new ones here, for that bit of consistency from someone who presumably liked the new system? And the dev response to this was no, they don't have any plans to retrofit any of the old hearts to make them repeatable, but it's very likely that as long as new maps have like the scope for them or whatever, any new hearts we see probably will also be repeatable as well. I guess it depends on audience feedback from how they liked the system at that. I agree with this wholeheartedly. I do want to see the old hearts be improved. Desperately. I want to see so much about Core Tyria be improved, but the way I think you do that isn't just some weird random little throwback every now and then. I think they need a dedicated, marketed, proper look back at Core Tyria for a serious overhaul of all that content, and that's where I'd start engaging in ideas like that. I'm not surprised that they wouldn't be doing that right here, right now. So, yeah. The next dev quote is something I think a lot of people will just look past, and they won't think there's anything in it, but I'm determined to talk about it on this video, because people who leak shit and are completely wrong about what they're leaking never get the criticism or the slap down they deserve when what they are saying is proven to be false bollocks. And that's what happened in one of these comments here. Somebody said, hey, could you clarify now, with all the new legendary stuff going on, can you clarify that the Stormbow you added was supposed to be a legendary at some point, but then you just bundled it off onto the gem store? What can you say? Now, the reason this question came up was because this is supposedly what came from an insider leak. A dev turned around and said, no, that was never supposed to be a legendary. This is complete nonsense, and we're happy to keep making more legendaries as time goes by. There won't necessarily be every single patch. So there you go, guys. Remember, the leaking stuff, most of the time what you're reading is crap. Sometimes there's some legitimate stuff in there, so maybe keep one eye on it. But honestly, don't take these things as much as gospel as I think a lot of the community do. This was just bollocks, basically. Another really small comment that nobody's really talking about that I think could be very big, especially for the World vs. Worlders. They suggest that there might be an improvement in an upcoming patch for World vs. World skill lag. So, we all know what this is. When massive Zergs collide, you're in Stone Mist, right? And there is a huge Zerg from all three sides. You're all pushing into Stone Mist at once. You get the skill delay. You cannot do a goddamn thing. Half of what it is to be a good World versus World or almost is learning how to fight under these circumstances. This has been a plague, especially in World versus World, but on some of the other encounters that ArenaNet have designed, even in PvE before, for a long time, okay? And I'm sure that they are always looking to try and improve this somehow. Well, they've got an update that they hope will improve this in the future, and I think that's going to be a very big thing if it goes even half of the way to remedying the issue. If anybody really notices a difference with this in the upcoming patches, let me know, because I think that's a pretty huge thing. Next up, we have a question about current events. So there's a lot of current event stuff going on now. There are a lot of achievements that you can get. And obviously the fear is that they are current events. Current events is kind of like a mini encapsulated little version of Living World Season 1 that is running while all the epic Living World Season 2 stuff's going on in the new form of Season 3. Yeah, that was a bit of a weird way to put it, but it's cool. But the suggestion is that because they're only current events, eventually they'll go away, right? Like the Bloodstone crazed creatures are eventually going to disappear. Are we going to have anomalies for the next 10 years of Guild Wars Wars 2's life wandering around where you can get those achievements. So somebody asked, when are they going away? And ArenaNess actually said that they have absolutely no plans right now to get rid of them whatsoever. And that they're happy to keep making them between episodes as they currently do. Something's going to have to be done eventually because that achievement category is going to get more and more and more bloated as time goes by. But on the other hand, with one of the recent user interface patches that they put through where your unfinished achievements appear at the top of the list instead of the bottom now, I kind of don't care if that area gets ridiculously bloated. We'll see. But yeah, so there's no plan to get rid of those. You guys can relax. If you've been on a huge hiatus from the game for a while now, you can still just load in and you've got all of that extra stuff to do and it will just keep growing as a list, which is kind of nice. Okay. So, I kind of want to finish off here with a lot of big quotes from Mo. This is sort of what the AMA opened up with. This is what I was talking about at the start of the video, where it was like he seemed to be ready and waiting with some of these things that had happened recently, and he had answers in the can. So, let's go through them. They're pretty big topics. Now, first of all, he addresses a big comment that we were talking about. I think I did a Q&A episode on it, to have come from NCSoft a little while ago, maybe a month and a half ago. You guys might not remember, but NCSoft released an investor report where they showed that Guild Wars 2 had earned a lot less in that quarter than it ever had done before. This was during the content drought. And as a response to that, NCSoft were hoping to push out future Guild Wars 2 expansions much faster because this would earn them profit. So this quote inspired a lot of discussion in the community because it was kind of one of these things of, oh, stupid producer sees an expansion Heart of Thorns earned them lots of cash, so they're going to try and do that lots and lots and lots, and they don't realize that you need time to make it, blah, 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 blah. My takeaway from that at the time was, well, in NCSoft's eyes, of course they're going to say that the next expansion is coming shorter because it took a bloody long time to get Heart of Thorns out initially, and I didn't really see it as a particularly bad omen. But people were pretty upset, pretty worried about that. I thought Mo had a great response to this. I'm going to copy him verbatim on it. So he says that, remember, NCSoft is our parent company, but decisions about Guild Wars 2 will always come from us. He says, don't read into a one-off statement like that. Someday we'll have a lot to talk about regarding the next expansion pack, but it's not today, and it's not anytime soon. That makes me really happy. Some of you guys might hear that, not anytime soon, and you'll be disappointed. That makes me happy. It makes me happy because knowing that they're going to give it the time it needs to have the scope it needs is so crucial. They're also going to burn a lot of their consumers if people are being asked for a fully priced expansion again so soon after Heart of Thorns came out, and people felt like that wasn't worth the full price already. The longer they wait here, guys, that means the more Living World comes out in between as well. And the more Living World that comes out in between, which is free content if you're actively playing the game, or even if you're not, you can convert gold into gems, so it's still free. The longer that they wait, the more of this content goes out that people hopefully will start associating with Heart of Thorns itself, and people will think of the value of the initial expansion as being worth more, and it's just good, okay? Everything about it is good. Waiting, not being rushed by the producers, it's excellent, it's brilliant news. I'm really happy that you basically talked about that, because I think a lot of people, it had passed on from their minds as well. So next we have another comment from Mo. It's about legendary armor. So this has been a bit of another controversial topic, and that's because it's so hard to believe that armor is that much more difficult to make than outfits. And people begrudge that the only real way to get a lot of these new looks is through outfits and through the gem store, which isn't very fun. And I completely agree with that. It seems crazy, Mo's old comment, what did he say? It took 6 months to make a single set of armor? And legendary armor is obviously a step above. It's going to have extra effect, and a lot of people, by the way, are hoping that legendary armor will be cultural too. So if that happens, it's 15 fully distinct sets, not including male versus female. Because what you'd have to make is a char heavy, char medium, char light, and then if you add male versus female as well, by the way, it's char heavy male, char heavy female, and then all over again for every single race. So I can see why legendary armor might take a long time, but he gives us a bit of an update. He says that the medium and the light stuff still needs a lot of work, so don't expect it anytime soon. They're going to release all three at once, and because those aren't very nearly done, don't expect it. But Heavy's doing really well. And he even says that in a couple of weeks, they might be able to cap a little video for us, and we might see a YouTube demonstration of what the Heavy legendary armor looks like. And I think a lot of us who have been raiding and building up our legendary insights will be really, really keen to hear about that. If this is a true successor and equivalent in terms of prestige and stuff of Obsidian armor, which I appreciate, by the way, in Guild Wars 1 was pretty much super ugly. If it feels like a spiritual successor to that, I will be very, very happy. And I don't mean aesthetically, I just mean in terms of a really epic, awesome gold that looks good in the end. So Mo keeps going as well with these big comments. He talks as well about Gale Grey getting hacked in Guild Wars 1. I don't think I talked too much on the channel about this, but I had a lot of stream discussions and I was tweeting about it as it happened. It was a big event for Guild Wars 1. It's not been pulled offline many times ever, really. And one of those times was in this year. Why? Because a player, essentially, people are saying hacked, but what he actually did was socially engineered. He pretended to be Gale to support continuously until some unknowing person on the support side of things just gave up Gale's account to him. And he had, from that, access to a bunch of dev commands, Gale Grey's unique frog mini pets, and so on and so on and so on. It was pretty huge. Mike follows up on the AMA explaining that they filed a criminal complaint about the damn thing, and Gale chimed in saying she got her frog back. So it was nice to see a little update on that. I love the thought of this guy, this kid, whoever he is out there, getting goddamn arrested for hacking into Guild Wars 1. Oh, I would pay some serious money to see that happening. Mo goes on. He's knocking it out of the park. He goes on to talk about insider trading. Now, I talked about this, I think, at the very start of the video. And this was basically an event whereby some alpha testers, supposedly, and an influencer, that's someone like me, someone a part of the Guild Wars 2 partner program who gets access to the content a little bit before it goes out, they used that knowledge, that early knowledge, to their advantage, leaked that information in some cases, by the way, to buy items in Guild Wars 2 that were going to get a lot of value. And the main thing that this was built around was the matrices, stabilizing matrices before the previous patch. One of the influencers was just unbelievably monumentally stupid about the way that they did this, bragging about it in their guild chat, breaking so many rules. And needless to say, a lot of other people felt cheated when they found out about this. Why are these people being afforded opportunities above everyone else? That's not fair. It's right, it's not fair. But nobody could really get a public message from ArenaNet about it, who'd stayed tight-lipped. I think staying tight-lipped generally is a smart idea, but Mo came in to talk about this here and actually had a pretty good response. He explained that the people who were doing these offenses have been punished, have been removed from various programs, and he goes on to explain that with this patch, and therefore presumably the future patches too, what they did at ArenaNet was they looked at all the items that could spike in price, and there were 16 for Rising Flames. And they watched on the trading post every single one of those. And if anybody started buying them up or anything happened, the day that the patch went out, they were going to just change the recipes. So nobody could possibly earn any profit whatsoever from insider trading or whatever. It just so happens with Rising Flames, nobody was cheeky enough to try an insider trade. I mean, who the hell would be with so much heat around, right? But in the future patches, someone might get some balls and try and do it again, and boom, ArenaNet are there, they're watching, they're waiting, they'll shift the recipes, even right up to the morning before the patch goes out. That's pretty lean development there, and hopefully that should nip it in the bud. It was a great response, it just took a while for ArenaNet to get around to saying it. And that is pretty much it. There was a final mention as well, honourable mention here that's quite cool to me and anybody who raids. They did confirm that the next raid release is coming along nicely. I know some of us have been thinking maybe they were taking a big break after the original Heart of Thorns raid, worries that there'd only be one raid per expansion or whatever, but this isn't just a new wing, guys. This is a whole new raid they're making somewhere. There's even a cheeky comment that apparently it might even be harder than the first raid. My leaning is that it could be a one-wing deal, something like the Wizard's Tower or a more localized singular thing. They talked about the fact that they wanted to do stuff like that before. When we'll actually get it, I have no idea. It's probably a long way away, but that's fine, because really when you go back and look at the Forsaken Thicket and the original raid, the first wing was a lot longer and a lot more little things going on in it than the subsequent ones. So I like the idea of them having a break and really getting to push out that quality. And there you go, guys. That's about it. The AMA was not as big as the previous one, but definitely a lot of great things to hear about. Again, I think the best thing is this idea that each patch might have a new map. Phenomenal. We'll see whether they actually manage to handle it. Let me know what you think about some of these topics, guys. If you've got any further questions, I'll be in the comments to respond. If you want me to talk more about certain things like, I don't know, the insider trading or whatever, I'll be lending an ear. Thanks very much. I'll get back to you tomorrow for plenty more good, juicy stuff on the patch, and especially some of the lore implications of the things we've seen. So thanks, guys. Have a wonderful evening. Hope you're enjoying yourself, and I'll see you next time.